Hi guys, Mrs. Rainierson here, back with chapter 27. Let's get started. Lady Thornton hated Ruth, and Ruth hated all of us. Not that I blamed her. A few days after Maggie left, in the middle of another silent, awkward meal, Ruth took a swallow of water, then belched. It's kind of funny though. I could tell it was an accident, not an impertinence. But Lady Thornton rolled her eyes and sighed as though belching Germans were far too much for her to bear. "Oh, stop it," I said. "Ruth can't help belching, but you can help the rude noises you make." Lady Thornton lowered her chin, looked down her nose at me, and glared. "I hardly think." A sudden crash shook the table. I jumped. It came from Susan. Susan, who picked up her plate and slammed it down hard. "Ada's right," she said calmly. "Eleanor, you can help the noises you make. Also, I will not continue to be the referee in this house, nor the sole cook, nor do I wish to live in the middle of a battlefield. Bad enough there's a war outside our home. We don't need a war inside as well." Lady Thornton's mouth formed a thin, grim line. "I'm doing the best I can." "I don't believe so," Susan said. "When Becky died, I thought I was doing the best I could too. Then the children arrived, and it turned out I could do better. It wasn't easy, but I could do it." She stood. "Let's go take a walk," she said to Lady Thornton. "You and I. Children, when you're finished eating, I expect all three of you to do the evening work in a calm and cooperative manner." She grabbed Lady Thornton by the elbow and walked her out the door. Jamie, Ruth, and I stared. Jamie said, "Core." When we finished eating, Ruth cleared her plate and then started to walk up the stairs. "No," I said. "You heard Susan. Come back here and help." Ruth sniffed. "I'm supposed to study, not do the housework." I said, "I do both." Ruth said, "That's because you live here." Ruth lived here too, as far as I could tell. "Wash or dry?" I asked. "Jamie's going to bring in the coal." Ruth looked at me. She folded her arms across her chest. I folded my arms across mine. Finally, Ruth looked away. "Dry," she said, and did. Susan and Lady Thornton returned while I was taking my bath. I came downstairs in my pajamas and dressing gown. Well, "Ready for our story?" Susan asked. Jamie was curled up beside her. Lady Thornton sat, as usual, in her wingback chair, knitting a stocking. Her face was flat and calm. I wasn't sure what to think. Susan sounded normal now, but at dinner she had not been normal. I felt anxious. "Are you finished being angry?" I asked. "Yes," she said. "And you survived it. You're okay." "Maybe." "Tomorrow," Lady Thornton said, "you and I are doing the shopping, Ada. Together." Next morning, Susan taught us, the way she always did. Lady Thornton came down late. "Good morning, Susan. Good morning, children. Ada, Jamie, Ruth." She said Ruth's name stiffly, but at least she didn't sneer. Ruth glanced up from her textbook. "Good morning," she said. "Ready, Ada?" Lady Thornton pulled on her gloves. In the village, the women in the queue outside the butcher shop were all politeness towards Lady Thornton. If they were surprised to see her doing the shopping with me, they didn't let on. We stood for an hour. When we finally reached the front of the queue, the only choices left were beef shin bones or a ragged piece of liver. Yuck. "Sorry," the butcher said, wiping his hands on his grimy apron. "All I've got." Lady Thornton peered into the glass case, then looked down at me. "Do you know how to cook liver?" she asked. I shook my head. Susan would. I didn't like liver. I thought it tasted muddy. Ugh. I've never had it either. Lady Thornton grimaced. "I told her you and I would make dinner tonight." "I can do shin bones," I said. She raised her eyebrows. "Really?" She shuddered. "I never thought of shin bones as something people actually ate." I said to the butcher, "A shilling's worth of the beef shins, please. You want them sliced like your mother gets them?" "Susan's not my mother." "Right," said the butcher. "You want them sliced like she gets them?" Lady Thornton looked amused. I gave the butcher a dignified nod. "Please." At home, Lady Thornton watched as I browned the shins and left over dripping. She chopped the carrots while I chopped celery and a slice of onion. Then I put the shins in a pan of water, added the chopped veg, plus salt and pepper and some herbs and things, and covered the whole mess, and then stuck it in a slow oven. "That's it?" Lady Thornton asked. "Takes a couple of hours to cook," I said. "So we should put some potatoes in too, and maybe some apples." In wartime, you were never supposed to use your oven to cook only one dish. It wasted fuel. We found other things that could be baked and put them in the oven. What next? Lady Thornton asked. I've got to go help Fred. I couldn't imagine Lady Thornton on the business end of a pitchfork. On either end, actually. Apparently, neither could she. I want to finish some paperwork for the WVS, she said. We can just leave all this to cook? I nodded. That's not so hard, she said, with a wide smile. I knew she didn't really feel cheerful. I knew she was pretending. I liked her better for being willing to pretend. As I pulled on my coat, Ruth came in from outside. Where are you going? She asked. Stables to do chores. Can I come? I looked at Lady Thornton. She pursed her lips. I shook my head no. Thanks. Beef shins are just about the least expensive kind of beef you can buy, but if you cook them just right, they taste lovely. By the time I got home from chores, the whole house smelled savory and good. I took the leftover oatmeal from breakfast, formed it into lumps, and dropped them into the stew's gravy. Just as I hoped, they swelled and turned into something like dumplings. As I was finishing, Lady Thornton walked in. Why didn't you let me know you'd come back? She asked. I would have done that with you. I hadn't even thought about it. I wasn't used to Lady Thornton helping in the kitchen, she said almost apologetically. It wasn't ever part of my training to learn to cook, you know. When I was growing up before the First War, girls in my class were expected to assume we would hire a cook. I didn't reply. Was I supposed to feel sorry for her? She wouldn't have hired me to be her kitchen maid before the war. Not me nor any girl like me who grew up poor in the London slums. I started to take the potatoes out of the oven, one by one, using a towel to protect my hands. Lady Thornton said, I suppose where you grew up you often ate Beechen? I said, we could never afford Beechen. We were lucky to get bacon once a week. Lady Thornton said sharply, I wasn't joking, Ada. I straightened and looked her in the eye. Neither was I. She looked as uncomfortable as I'd ever seen her. After a long pause, she said, Was that true for your neighbors too? I shrugged. Maybe, probably. Most of them had fathers that worked, but most had more mouths to feed. Jamie wasn't any skinnier than the rest of his kids' his age. Dirtier, maybe, but not skinnier. I sliced the potatoes open and arranged them on the plates. Lady Thornton spooned beef shin stew over the steaming potatoes. What about you? She asked. Were you worse off than Jamie? Even now, thinking about it made me want to send my mind far away. I stayed in the one room, I said. I never left it. Lady Thornton paused, her spoon dripping stew. Susan told me that once, she said. I didn't believe her. Susan always believed me about Mom. Ma'am. I never thought a mother could be like that, Lady Thornton said. Cold, yes. I've known unaffectionate mothers. My own was quite remote, but not evil. What you describe is evil. I said, Susan says she was incapacitated. Lady Thornton nodded. Very much so. That night, while we ate beef shin, Lady Thornton asked Ruth quite civilly how her studies were progressing. Ruth swallowed and returned a civil answer. Later, as we were washing up, I overheard Susan thank Lady Thornton for the meal. Don't thank me, Lady Thornton said. I'm beginning to learn how much I never realized I didn't know. Which is kind of sad. Chapter 28. Lady Thornton tried harder, but she didn't thaw all the way. She quit opening Ruth's mail, but she always asked Ruth who her letters were from. If Lady Thornton had known how to read German, she would have insisted on reading them. They're all from my mother or my father, Ruth said. My mother's have already been cleared by a censor. I told you. You don't have to be afraid. I'm being cautious, Lady Thornton said. Of course I'm not afraid. Ruth cut her eyes at me. I grinned. Of course Lady Thornton was afraid. It made sense to be weary of Germans. On the other hand, if Ruth really planned to kill us in her sleep, I thought she would have done it by now. A week later, Ruth and I were studying at the table when someone knocked at the door. Ruth got up. Hello, said a voice I recognized. I jumped out of my chair. Jonathan? Ada! It was Jonathan, tall and thin, in his RAF uniform and leather flying jacket. He grinned. Is my mother home? Lady Thornton came halfway down the stairs. She saw Jonathan, screamed, and ran the rest of the way. A happy scream. I've never heard one before. Jonathan swung Lady Thornton around in a hug. He said, "Sorry I couldn't warn you. I've only got leave at the last minute." "Oh," Lady Thornton stood back from him, beaming. "It's so good to see you. I'm so glad." "This is Ruth," I said. Jonathan held out his hand. "I've heard about you," he said. Ruth grimaced and darted a glance at Lady Thornton, but Jonathan continued. "My father says you're brilliant at maths." Ruth smiled. She almost never smiled. Brilliant? I hadn't thought she was brilliant. "You must be starving," Lady Thornton said to Jonathan. "Let's get you something to eat." She led him into the kitchen and put the kettle on. She started rummaging through the cupboard. "Where's Susan hiding those eggs?" Jamie had finally gotten 2 hens named Penelope and Persnickety. Those are cute names. They each laid an egg every single day. It was glorious, having that many eggs again. Lady Thornton poked her head out the back door. "Jamie, come here!" Susan was in the village doing WVS work. She wouldn't be home until time for tea. Jamie ran in, covered in mud. He saw Jonathan, drew himself up, and saluted. Jonathan saluted back. "At ease," he said. "Yes, sir." Lady Thornton said, "We need a treat, Jamie." "I told you already," Jamie said. "We are not eating my hens." "Of course not," said Lady Thornton. "I was thinking omelet. What happened to the extra eggs?" Jamie shrugged. "Susan saving them," I said. "She took them out of Lady Thornton's sight. She was going to preserve them in an fencing class. She told me so we had a reserve, in case a fox got to the hens or Lady Thornton bought lamb chops again." Lady Thornton laughed. "She won't mind if we splurge for Jonathan." I wasn't sure, but I fetched the eggs from their hiding place. There were 8 of them. Lady Thornton threw the entire week's butter ration into a frying pan and cooked a vast omelet using all 8 eggs. That's ginormous. That's a lot. Every single one. Susan was going to be livid. On the other hand, the omelet smelled delicious. "Sit down," Lady Thornton said. "Everyone, sit down." I'll take my work to my room," said Ruth. "Sit and eat," said Jonathan. "Don't you like omelets?" She hesitated. "I don't want to eat your food." He grinned. "I'm pretty sure I'm eating yours." Ruth let Lady Thornton serve her tiny portion of the omelet. Jamie and I had small portions too. Lady Thornton didn't take any, which left nearly half the omelet for Jonathan. He ate it in 6 quick bites. We watched him. He was thinner than he'd been at Christmas, his face sharp angles and lines. Lady Thornton said, "Perhaps we can manage a cake for tea." Ruth and I exchanged glances. There went the sugar ration. We'd be eating our oatmeal salted for a month. Yuck. Reminds me of their oatmeal and vegetables. Jonathan wiped his lips on the napkin. "I brought us a treat." He reached into his jacket pocket, pulled something out, and placed it on the table. It was thin and long and smooth, yellow speckled with small brown spots. "Jonathan," his mother said. "Where'd you get that?" Ruth asked, sounding thrilled. "What is it?" asked Jamie. He picked it up carefully and handed it to me. I didn't know what it was either. It felt leathery and a little bit squishy. I put it back on the table. "I don't want to know where you got it," Lady Thornton said. "Black market, I'm sure. I don't need to hear about that." "No," Jonathan said. "There's no ration on fruit." I said, "That's a fruit?" It was called a banana. Lady Thornton had had no problem using up every egg in the house, but she wasn't greedy about the banana. "We'll have it for tea when we're all here," she said. "I won't cut it up before Susan comes home." We all went into the sitting room. I poked up the fire. Lady Thornton fussed over Jonathan, smoothing his hair and wondering if he needed more tea. "Stop," he said. "I'm fine." He didn't look fine. He looked tired down to his bones. Whenever he was still, his face fell into tense and anxious lines. Even when he smiled at Jamie, the smile didn't reach his eyes. Jonathan tugged off the green and brown scarf wrapped around his neck. "Take a look at that," he said, tossing it to Jamie. "It's made out of a piece of camouflage parachute." Whirr! Jamie grabbed the scarf by its corners and pulled it, fluttering around the room. He got one of the 10 airplanes and tied it to the edges of the scarf. "He'll wreck it," I said. Jonathan shook his head. "He won't." He turned to Ruth. "Tell me what it's like in Germany," he said. Ruth shrugged. "We left almost 2 years ago." "Right," he said. "What made you leave?" He leaned forward. He looked like he was really interested, not just trying to be polite. "We're Jewish," she said. "Yes, my father told me." My father was a university professor in Dresden, in statistics. He lost his job because Hitler decided that the Jews could not teach at universities anymore. Jonathan nodded as though this was the answer he expected. How bad had it gotten? Ruth's voice stayed flat and emotionless. Jews could not vote. Were no longer counted as German citizens. We weren't allowed to go to the parks or restaurants or public swimming pools. We weren't allowed to ride bicycles, go to the movies, attend concerts, visit the beach. A mob burned down our synagogue. I was expelled from school. You did something wrong? I asked. Ruth said, I'm Jewish. Jewish children were no longer allowed to go to school. Just because you don't believe Jesus is God? It didn't have anything to do with my religion, Ruth said. It didn't have anything to do with what I personally believe, with whether or not I practice Judaism. According to Hitler, if my grandparents were born Jewish, I'm a Jew. If my grandparents converted to Christianity on the days of their birth, and my parents and I had always been raised to believe Jesus was God, I would still be Jewish according to Hitler. It's not about religion, it's about race. Hitler sees the Jews as a separate race. Lady Thornton was staring at her hands. Had she known any of this? I said. Had she known any of this? I said. So it really isn't anything about your God? It's the same God, Ruth said. Christians read the Old Testament too. Jonathan said. Christ himself was raised a Jew. Jonathan, Lady Thornton said. What? It's a fact. After a pause, he said, one of my best flying mates is Jewish. Grew up in Liverpool. He's got family in Poland he's worried about. He said to Ruth, I'm glad your family escaped. We searched for months to find a country that would take us, Ruth said. America wouldn't. France wouldn't. Finally, England did. Then we weren't allowed to sell our house. We had to leave all of our money and everything we owned behind. She swallowed. Her voice trembled. We had to leave my grandmother behind. Man, that's why she was so upset about that letter. Oh, man. That's where we're going to stop today. Bye, guys.